My, how things have changed. It's just been a couple of weeks. Let's go back to the middle of April when the Surface Water Monitor, that's produced by the University of Washington, a fairly new index that models surface water, which is a surprisingly difficult thing to really get a handle on, was showing most of North Dakota, most of South Dakota, except for basically the Yankton to Sioux Falls area, in a fairly dry situation. The white meaning fairly neutral, meaning about average for mid-April, and it's usually kind of dry in mid-April. But a lot of North Dakota and northern South Dakota was just flat out dry. 2 weeks of rain to the tune of 1 to 4 inches, and now it's suddenly gone to quite wet. The Sioux Falls area is still quite wet, but 1 to 4 inches of rain in April, that's not really out of the ordinary unusual, but it certainly is not the sort of thing that happens every spring. It has turned North Dakota and much of South Dakota from quite dry to actually quite wet, thank you. And it's just really kind of amazing how quickly that turned about. Why does this happen? It has to do with something called the Arctic Oscillation. All winter long we've been talking about El Nino, but in fact El Nino is not the only thing that gave us a fairly warm, dry winter. And of course I don't include the Sioux Falls area into that because the Sioux Falls area had snow. But from there southward it's a little bit of a different situation with El Nino. El Nino in conjunction with the Arctic Oscillation, which is a circulation in the upper atmosphere around the low pressure system near the pole, when that is in the positive category, that particular branch of jet stream wind tends to go pretty fast, and the mid-latitudes, our region, tends to not get too many Arctic air outbreaks. Well, over the last couple of weeks, we're still in El Nino, although it's weakening, but the Arctic Oscillation has slowed way down. The low has gotten much weaker, which allows Arctic air to meander a bit and at times drip down into the northern latitudes. It is now strongly negative, and we have this sudden change. So how does that affect the jet stream? The polar jet is much stronger now and much more wavy, and it's been locked for a while. Now it's beginning to get more progressive. That will continue this week. A little ridge of high pressure will actually give us a touch of warm weather. The forecast this week, it's going to be fairly dry across the northern plains, some wet weather Pacific Northwest. The stormy weather down south will mostly be along the Gulf Coast and along the Appalachians and eastward. Corn Belt typical weather. Northern plains warm and dry, but most notably this week will be fairly warm. Next week, I don't see a lot of really unusual weather anywhere. This rain in the middle of the country may not be extraordinary, but across the northern plains looks like we'll be turning just a little bit cooler again, and that's the second week of May. I don't know that the wet weather will continue, but the wet weather the past 2 weeks has certainly changed things. This week warm and dry, next week cooler, still probably dry.